All right, guys. I'm still not entirely sure what I'm going to call this because it kind of jumps all over the place and topics, or it's not really pinpointed well. But that's not a big deal. Um, this is mainly about a case study that I found, relatively recent, especially when it comes to religiosity, because a lot of our studies are fairly old. Um, so, what I kind of focus on, because it's just the most interesting to me, and the way I tend to view these things is, well, Daniel Kahneman goes into System 1 and System 2 thinking, if you've ever heard of him. And he's sort of, I believe, a pioneer in that field. So essentially, System 1 is quick, intuitive thinking. System 2 is more complex and elaborate, detailed, complex thought. So I've always kind of held that there's a some sort of a correlation or link. Like you can see it in observations, although your personal observations isn't the same thing as a case study. But I've always thought that there's a correlation between people who are highly religious, intuitive thinking in general, and also this will link into conspiratorial thinking as well. All three of these are linked. They're not separate. They're not like issues that are completely random. They definitely occur together for a reason. At least it seems extremely obvious to me. But yeah, I'm definitely not going to read all this because it's freaking massive, but I will link the Cambridge study in the description. So I don't know. I'm just going to get started. Maybe I'll say some things along the way. Maybe I'll wait till the end. Who knows? Oh, wait. So, first, I want to give a sort of definition for intuitive thinking, just so you understand what I mean when I say it, because intuition or intuitive is a word that has a little bit of ambiguity and people use it in different ways. So, it's important that you understand what I mean. Intuitive thinking is a fast, automatic, and often unconscious process of making judgments and decisions, relying on instincts, prior knowledge, and immediate perceptions rather than systematic reasoning. It's about, quote, gut feelings or gut instincts and can lead to quick decisions without extensive analysis. So you should have a better idea of what I'm talking about now. Let me present. All right. Religion, Spirituality, and Susceptibility to Conspiracy Theories, examining the role of analytic thinking and post critical beliefs. This was published last year, almost exactly the 5th of June, 2024. The abstract is the condensed version here for you. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased the political and scholarly attention on conspiracy theories. Among other predictors, religious and spiritual influences on conspiracy beliefs have been widely discussed in the literature. We suggest analyzing the relationship between religion and spirituality on the one hand and conspiracy beliefs on the other hand from the perspective of religious information processing. Based on the post-critical belief scale, PCBS, we argue that literal interpretations of religious information are positively associated with conspiracy beliefs. Furthermore, we assume that individual differences in analytic cognitive style account for the relationship between religious attitude, spirituality, and conspiracism. Using a quota sample of German adults, we find that literal interpretations of religious content positively correlate with conspiracy beliefs for the literal affirmation of transcendence, an example being orthodoxy, and the literal disaffirmation of transcendence, an example being atheism. These findings suggest that religious information processing is related to conspiracy beliefs for religious and non-religious individuals. Moreover, our results show a stable association between holistic spirituality and conspiracy beliefs. The relationships between different types of religious attitudes, spirituality, and conspiracy beliefs hold even after accounting for analytic versus intuitive thinking. The implications for the study of religious attitudes and conspiracy beliefs are discussed. So a couple of things that kind of sticks out to me. They do focus on the cognitive style, which is what I kind of brought up, the way of thinking, your brand of thinking. So a lot of this is specific or especially correlated to people who take religious doctrine literally. And that makes sense. You kind of link it because for one, to me, it's very strange to look at like religious literature in a symbolic way. Like, what are you doing if that's the case? Like, you see it as like a story, like reading Pinocchio or the Three Little Bears or something. So, I don't know, it's a strange concept to me of why you would even do it. Like, I can understand like cultural religiosity to where you just kind of go with the flow, and it's kind of what like the culture around you does, but you don't really take it that seriously, and you're not especially religious as a result. That makes sense. But anyway, it makes sense that the whole like ultra orthodox belief in religion, the hardcore literal concept, is associated with conspiratorial thinking and intuitive thinking in general, because they're both, I mean, it makes sense that they're linked. Because these people, they're more likely to operate based on feels. They're more likely to operate based off of, hey, this sounds cool. Hey, this makes me feel good. Hey, this helps me deal with my fear of death, etc. They don't engage in complex analytical thinking. They don't break it down and go, hey, is my belief in this particular religion founded on reason? Let's analyze. And then you break every little part of that belief down. Like, that system too, that's actually logically thinking your way through it. Most of the time, these people don't do that. And that seems to be what this is showing. Anyhow, let's continue. Introduction. Driven by global crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, conspiracy theories are currently at the center of political and public debates. Conspiracy theories attribute major political or societal events to an elaborate plan carried out by a secret coalition of individuals who pursue malicious goals. Belief in conspiracy theories has potentially harmful effects on many aspects of political behavior, such as political engagement, intergroup attitude, and vote choice. The literature on the causes of beliefs in conspiracy theories has identified numerous cognitive, social, and ideological determinants of conspiratorial thinking. While scholars have long noted a link between conspiracism and belief in the paranormal, religious beliefs and spirituality have only recently become a focus in quantitative research. Accordingly, the empirical evidence for the relationship between religiosity, spirituality, and belief in conspiratorial forces is far from conclusive. Although individual religiosity is often positively, albeit moderately, associated with specific conspiracy beliefs and a general conspiracy mentality, some studies find no robust evidence for such an association. Interesting. We pursue two objectives in the present study. First, drawing on the typology of religious attitudes of Wolff, we want to shed light on the relationship among different dimensions of individual religiosity, spirituality, and beliefs in conspiracy theories. Specifically, we argue that a literal understanding, literal affirmation, and literal disaffirmation of religious content promotes belief in conspiracy narratives because they are linked to intuitive thinking. In contrast, symbolic interpretations of religious texts and teachings will reduce the probability of endorsing conspiracy narratives because this involves more analytic thinking. Taking a break from the text for a moment, that makes sense to me. Like, I think that's a good hypothesis to have. It kind of follows logically that that would be the case. Continuing, in addition, we suppose that holistic spirituality increases the endorsement of conspiracy theories because there is an elective affinity between spiritual and conspiratorial belief systems that results from their similarities in intuitive versus analytic reasoning. Second, based on dual process models of reasoning, we directly test whether the relationship between religiosity, spirituality, and conspiracy beliefs can be accounted for by individual differences in analytic cognitive style. Religion, spirituality, and conspiracy beliefs. In recent years, many theoretical works have addressed the relationship of religiosity, spirituality, and belief in conspiratorial forces. Scholars of conspiracy beliefs often differentiate between beliefs in specific conspiracy theories, example being the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and a general conspiracy mentality. Based on the observation that specific beliefs tend to form a coherent belief system, conspiracy mentality refers to a general disposition to explain events as controlled by malicious forces acting in secret. In this context, scholars often emphasize the commonality of conspiracy beliefs and holistic spirituality. Holistic spirituality is a term used to summarize beliefs and practices developed via New Age thought. Anthroposophy, I don't know what the fuck that is. Anthroposophy, Theosophy, esotericism, etc. These commonly assume the universal connectedness of all the elements in the universe and thus contest the duality between body and soul that characterizes Christian beliefs. Holistic beliefs stress the importance of individual experiences with transcendental realities to guarantee the authenticity of beliefs and the truth of any claims related to these beliefs. Within the holistic milieu, beliefs and practices serve the self, and individuals within this milieu reject the traditional forms of ecclesiastical authority institutionalized in churches. Holistic spiritualities, therefore, developed in opposition to Christian churches, contest the monopoly the latter claim on religious truth. Such contestation is not limited to the authority of churches, but extended to domination and exploitation in political and economic terms, defending an ethic or of equality and ultimate justice. Adherents to holistic spiritualities often assume that there is secret knowledge being suppressed by orthodoxy. Their combination of stigmatized knowledge and a mystical search for hidden truth creates a strong distrust of the political, scientific, and religious establishment. Thus, holistic spiritualities and conspiracy beliefs are both at odds with established truth-making institutions and contest the domination of these institutions. Spiritual believers see themselves in opposition to the Christian mainline congregations that dominate the religious field, just as conspiracy believers see themselves in opposition to the mainstream worldviews with regard to their political attitudes, health beliefs, and behaviors. Scholars of conspiracy beliefs argue that this similarity explains the higher disposition of spiritual believers toward conspiracy beliefs because of their deeply rooted conviction of having insights into the truth of hidden power structures. Ward and Voas even argue that a conspiritual movement has emerged on the web with a significant overlap between holistic beliefs and conspiracy dispositions. Empirical research, however, has shown that at the individual level, spirituality is moderately correlated with conventional religiosity, especially with the socialization into Christian religiosity. In reality, the two concepts are less distinct than the theoretical discussion suggests. The rationale explaining the association of conventional religiosity with conspiracy beliefs is less convincing. The discussion thus far has suggested that the correlation might be driven by the content of religious beliefs or exposure to religious teachings of Christian churches or other religious communities. Some scholars stress that both religions and conspiracy narratives refer to some form of salvation, assume the existence of invisible powers that operate beyond the realm of direct human experience, tend to establish agency and intentionality in unrelated events, or share the rejection of scientific research and evidence, However, there are also differences between religious and conspiratorial belief systems. First, whereas transcendental power in conventional religion strives for the good, the hidden powers of conspiracy narratives inflict harm on the powerless. Second, churches are unlikely to support and disseminate conspiracy narratives because they mainly support the existing political order. For instance, in the German context of strong ties between the mainline Christian churches and the state, political and social statements of the churches are aligned to the constitutional order. Conspiracy beliefs mobilizing against minorities, political elites, or science will not be supported. If the correlation between religiosity and conspiracy beliefs is not due to similar content, it is more likely due to cognitive and perceptual characteristics of individuals that predispose individuals to religious and conspiracy beliefs. Boyer introduced the concept of minimal counterintuitiveness to explain why religious information is easier to remember for human brains. The concept has also been used to explain belief in conspiracy theories, especially its counter-schematic nature. Example, the opposition to mainstream worldviews. This means that the common denominator between religiosity and conspiracy may be the way in which individuals process certain forms of information. In summary, the theoretical discussion oscillates between emphasizing similarities in content or underlying cognitive styles to explain associations between spirituality, religiousness, and conspiracy beliefs. This theoretical ambiguity is also reflected in the extant empirical evidence. Overall, the indicators of the strength of religious belief appear to be weakly to moderately positively related to a belief in conspiracy theories, although these results are inconsistent. One obvious reason for this is the low reliability and validity of the adopted measurement instruments. Most studies use single-item measures of self-reported religiosity, of the importance of religion or God in one's life, or of the frequency of church attendance. Studies using more extensive multiple-item measures of religiosity tend to report stronger associations. Only one study distinguishes different religious attitudes, finding positive effects of religious fundamentalism, but not of centrality of religious beliefs on conspiracism. Another reason could be that belief in conspiracy theories is captured both at the level of specific conspiracy narratives and at the level of general dispositions toward conspiracy thinking. In their meta-analysis, Franken et al. Find a mean-weighted correlation of R equals 0.25 between religiosity and a belief in specific conspiracy theories, and R equals 0.10 with indicators of a generalized conspiracy mentality. However, they include only 9 studies in their meta-analysis. A more extensive meta-analysis by Stacy Lowicks reports a mean correlation of R equals 0.14 based on 51 studies, but these correlations are highly scattered. He thus observes no differences between general or specific conspiracy beliefs. However, there is a difference regarding the number of items measuring religiosity. Studies with multiple item scales have yielded on average higher correlations than studies with single item measures. R equals 0.10. Unfortunately, Stacy Lowicks does not separate religious beliefs from holistic spirituality in his meta-analysis. We've really got to get better case studies out for understanding religiosity. They oftentimes put out things that are way too simplistic, and they don't cover enough variables, like especially the one where they simply ask people if they go to church. That doesn't tell you shit about their religiosity, really. It doesn't explain anything about their beliefs. I'll read probably this next one. The role of post-critical beliefs. We suggest including research on attitudes toward religious information into the study of the association between religiosity and conspiracy beliefs in terms of information processing. The psychology of religion has identified preferred ways of processing religious information, resulting in different types of attitudes towards religious texts and teachings. Wolff distinguishes 2 dimensions of the interpretation of religious information. The first is literal versus symbolic interpretation of religious texts and teachings. The second is an inclusion versus exclusion of transcendence. Based on these 2 dimensions, he defines 4 ideal types of attitudes toward religion. Now, this is a better study. First, orthodoxy is the literal affirmation of transcendental realities. Individuals hold literal beliefs in religious texts and believe in an immediate access to transcendental reality. Example, the relationship to a personal God. An example of religious literalism in its purest form is religious fundamentalism. The second type is the literal disaffirmation of transcendental realities, also called external critique. This attitude interprets any kind of religious sources literally, but rejects the possibility of any transcendental reality or the truth of any religion. External critique entails that religious teachings are irrational and thus erroneous. Any symbolic interpretation of religious information is excluded. Religious information is treated as it is formulated in the original scriptures or oral transmissions. Anti-religious attitudes and atheism are examples of literal disaffirmation. Orthodoxy and external critique both share the emphasis on literal interpretations of religious texts and teachings. The third attitude combines a symbolic interpretation with an affirmation of transcendence. This results in an attitude toward religion that Hotspot has called a second naivety, with orthodoxy being the first naivety, referring to Paul Ricoeur's notion of post-critical thought. This attitude to religion stresses the symbolic meaning of religious texts or transmissions and the need to interpret historical religious thought, including critical questions concerning religions and their truth claims. This attitude tries to reconcile a rational approach to religion with an affirmation of a transcendental reality. Example, it combines a religious belief with a symbolic representation of the world. Taking a moment from the text, this to me is like mental gymnastics. Like system one intuitively finds a need or desire to hold on to the belief in question. So instead of system two being used separately and like defeating system one, it's so important to their identity, at least in my personal view, that they use system two to engage in mental gymnastics to, instead of like how system two is supposed to work, where you start from scratch and you build your logical case. You start from intuition, whatever it is that you need, and then you use logic to try to build it like backward. That seems to be what is going on. But anyway, I'm going to continue. The last form is historical relativism, combining symbolic interpretation with the exclusion of transcendence. This stance toward religion denies the existence of any transcendental reality, but acknowledges that religious teachings or transmissions contain information about a society's social and moral order. It conceives religion as a social construction by humans. I've seen a lot of that. I think Jordan Peterson has tried to push this sort of narrative, this sort of historical relativism. But he'll flip-flop. He'll go from that, and then he'll try to go more literal, but be really wishy-washy about saying it. Okay, this is the last one for now. Analytic cognitive style and conspiracy beliefs. As discussed above, the empirical relationship between spirituality, religiousness, and belief in conspiracy theories is often explained with reference to similarities in terms of content or cognitive styles. Yet we contend that the substantive similarities between religious belief, spirituality, and support for conspiracy theories are negligible, making the argument unconvincing. By contrast, research in political psychology suggests that the observed correlations are explained by the fact that religious beliefs, conspiracy ideation, and other so-called epistemically unfounded beliefs, example, belief in the paranormal and pseudoscience, are rooted in individual differences in thinking styles, especially with regard to information about potential transcendental realities. Dual process theories of thinking distinguish between intuitive and holistic information processing styles, type 1, and more analytic and deliberative thinking, type 2, processes. While type 1 reasoning is fast, heuristic, and based on autonomous reactions, the type of processing involved in type 2 reasoning is under volitional control, piecemeal, and in line with epistemic rationality. Intuitive responses are an evolutionary default option of the thinking system, but they can be interpreted and inhibited by deliberative processes if someone has a disposition to engage in critical thinking. This view on human information processing implies that people adopt belief systems that are consistent with their preferred way of thinking. According to Stahl and Van Pruyen, type 1 reasoning compels individuals to epistemically unfounded beliefs because intuitive thinkers are less willing to scrutinize arguments and discern weak from strong evidence in favor of a claim. As a result, intuitive thinkers are more likely to exhibit reasoning bias, such as illusory detection of patterns and agency, which is typically for religious and conspiracist belief systems. This argument is consistent with empirical studies that find robust negative associations between performance-based measures of analytic cognitive style with conspiracy thinking and religious beliefs. I'll leave it there. It's not even halfway. This is a big one, but it's also really interesting. Anyhow, I'm going to leave it there. Sort of this endpoint here on analytic cognitive style and conspiracy beliefs sort of encapsulates like my theory. Sort of the abstract kind of lays it out, although it doesn't confirm it quite as much. But it's really interesting to kind of get in and sort of understand why they believe. Not just that they believe, and there could be quite a bit of argument in that as well, especially with my belief that a large portion is a defense mechanism. And if that's true, that's of course just my opinion, but if that's true, then is it actually a belief? Like, would you constitute it as an actual belief if it only serves, if the belief itself only serves as a way to keep your identity in check, to serve some sort of function, as like a way of purposefully lying to yourself? And in my view, mostly due to fear of the unknown, or especially fear of death. And I don't think that we exactly have the answer to that. I don't even know how you would set up a case study to find that out. But anyhow, this is interesting stuff. That's going to be it for now. You can chime in with any comments or issues, questions, suggestions, whatever you have. Thank you for your time.